career, leadership, life, health, and overall just wellness coaching company. And we have an awesome team of coaches here. We all have different specialties, but we're here to support you in really creating a career and lifestyle that you really love. So just to introduce myself a bit, I'm Kristin. I'm a life and career coach here on Vida, and I'm also a remote worker and digital nomad. So actually living abroad and kind of traveling really fueled my passion to become a coach. And I was living in Argentina and given the pandemic, returned back to the US and now am living and working in Mexico. And throughout my travel and abroad journey, it was a huge personal growth journey that has really fueled my mission of helping my clients empower themselves to find that greater fulfillment. And so what fulfillment looks like for me, for you, for all of us can look different, but I'm very passionate about hearing kind of what lights my clients up inside, those big goals and dreams, and really supporting them to go after that. And that could be a career transition, and that could also just be a general lifestyle change, or really wanting to create healthy habits, or what we're talking about today, creating boundaries. So just to get started, this is kind of the agenda of what we'll be talking about today, but I just wanted to get started by saying boundaries are so important, but as many of us know, they can be very challenging. It's definitely a process, and coming just to be completely open, in my start of my career was very much in that people pleaser state, say yes to everything, always be a team player. And as I've grown and created boundaries, I've seen how it's supported and made so many positive changes in my life. And I've also seen that in supporting clients and just noticed it in others, and how strong boundaries can really create so many positive impacts. So if you're someone who's kind of struggling with boundaries, I just want you to know you're not alone. It is a process, but step by step, starting small and building, you can really grow in this area, and you'll see how it empowers you, and it really creates these positive shifts in your life that make you want to keep growing in this area. So just to get started, just so you know, I want to make this presentation really interactive. I want us all to share and relate. So if anyone has kind of their own definition, I'd love to see in the chat, or feel free to unmute yourself, but I'd love you to share kind of how you define a boundary. So feel free to share that in the chat, or unmute if you're feeling like speaking up. Any ideas of what?
Hi, this is Skylar. I think boundaries are those bottom lines that we set up how we want others to respect ourselves, especially self-respect as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Skylar. Love that. Yes. Anyone else? I see self-protection, the limit, border, dividing line. Love that. Yes. So what is a boundary? Thank you for sharing. And yes, I love knowing no is a complete statement. Love that. We'll talk about that more later too. But yes, it's a guideline, a limit, or a rule. So this is something to protect you, to honor a need of yours, or a want. It's meant to protect, and what's a boundary for me could be different than what's a boundary for you. We all have different wants, needs, and desires. So we all have different boundaries to set up to protect that. And they can be physical, mental, or emotional. So physical boundaries can include your body, your sense of personal space, and kind of privacy. So just to give an example, if someone's kind of a close talker and they're kind of really getting in your face and very relevant to the times, many of us have a strong boundary there right now, like back away. So we may step back and give that nonverbal signal that you feel your space is violated. So that person might be impeding on a physical boundary. But boundaries can also be emotional. It can be related to kind of protecting your sense of self-esteem, your ability to separate your feelings from that of others. And just an example of kind of what impeding on an emotional boundary can look like is kind of sacrificing your plans, dreams, or goals in order to please others. Like sacrificing something that's important to you to please another is really impeding kind of on that personal need. And that can be kind of a violation of a boundary. So why are boundaries important? So these are clear guidelines that are set to really protect you. So it's really important for your overall well-being. It's important for mental health, for healthy living. You'll notice, or you may notice, that those with strong boundaries have a strong identity, and it really can promote that confidence, self-esteem, and self-respect. Because when you have strong boundaries in place, you're really honoring your needs, your wants, and you're prioritizing yourself. So by doing that, you'll feel this boost in self-esteem and self-respect, and overall confidence, because you're really honoring things that make you happy and that are important to you. Now, I know this all might sound easier said than done, but really, it is a process. But as you build, you'll feel these feelings of self-empowerment, self-respect, and confidence as you put these into place, because ultimately, you're protecting yourself, your wants, and your needs. So just to give an example of kind of no boundaries versus boundaries, I'm going to use a hypothetical situation of, say, Mary. And Mary, she's got a busy work schedule, but her general hours are 9 to 6. And Mary really values her evening time. She really values that quality time with her 2 kids and her husband. She also likes to work out in her evenings, but she's found herself so busy, and she just keeps working till 9 or 10 p.m. every night, and not logging off till late, and only kind of getting to tuck her kids into bed. So without boundaries, Mary may be feeling angry and frustrated, stressed from working these long days and not getting that time to reboot, depleted. She may feel kind of resentful towards her work, or disrespected, and a bit powerless. But maybe Mary realizes this, and she decides to put a boundary in place, and she decides that this family time and this evening workout is so important to her. She's going to create a boundary that she's not going to work after 7 p.m. She's going to log out, disconnect, and really stop working at the end of the day. And by doing that, Mary starts to be able to have dinner with her family. She gets her workout in. She really has that time to reboot and recharge. And with just one boundary, which again, it might be challenging at first, but once she gets that into place with that one boundary, she'll start noticing she feels happier, calm. She's energized because she's getting that time for herself. And she feels empowered. And creating this one boundary can empower Mary to create more boundaries that support her overall well-being and her needs. So that's just an example of how the difference in emotions and how we can feel when we have no boundaries in place versus putting even just one boundary into place. So just to kind of outline how to create boundaries, I wanted to share 3 steps for how we can create boundaries. So I'm going to use an example to go through this to really show kind of how to go through this process. But the first step is reflecting on what's important to you. What do you value? What do you need? So to share a personal example, morning routine, that is key for me, and it's something I really value, having time to meditate, to journal, to do a yoga class before starting the day and really getting into my work routine. So knowing that's important to me is that first step. So reflect on what's important to you as a starting point. Then kind of writing out a non-negotiable. So knowing that a non-negotiable that could come out of that is I need time in my morning for myself before going into work and supporting others, because that's what fuels me to really be my best to support others. So that's just an example of a non-negotiable, needing time for myself before supporting others in the day. So then after having that non-negotiable, it's determining a limit, rule, or guideline that's needed to support and protect that non-negotiable. So how can I protect that? Knowing that's a need and a want of mine, or knowing a need and want of yours, what's a limit or a rule you can use to really protect that? Because that is so important. If this is so important to you, it's so important to protect that for yourself. So my boundary is I will not check emails or start responding to Slack messages until 9 a.m. And I'm a morning person, so I like to get started early, but that gives me this time for those items that are so important, that morning meditation, yoga, and journaling, and set me up for a good headspace in the day. And by honoring that boundary for myself, I'm getting put in a great headspace and starting my day off to a great start. But it all starts with you. So it's the first step is being clear on what this boundary is, and then honoring it for yourself. So I want you all to take some time to just reflect for a minute. So think about what's important to you. So what do you value? Thinking about what we talked about so far, what are some specific areas of your life that you're feeling you need to set boundaries? Is there an area where you often are finding yourself feeling triggered? Do you find yourself resentful towards something specific? And do you feel that there's a boundary you could put in place to protect and shift that? So kind of what limits do you feel you need to put in place? I see someone's mentioning in the chat schedules. Yes, so thinking about kind of areas that you need to create these limits to really protect yourself and your needs and really prioritize yourself. So I want you all to continue to reflect a bit and let's all give this a try. So if you have a piece of paper and a pen or on your computer, let's get started by first, and this might come to some of us easier than others. We may already have a list we're coming up with in our head, but maybe write one to three out, and we're gonna go through those steps. So first, I want you to write down just 1 to 3 of your non-negotiables. If only one is coming up, no problem, but write 1 to 3 of your non-negotiables. Some other examples of non-negotiables could be, I will not work on weekends. Like weekend is my time. Or I need to go to bed early so that I'm energized for the next day. Things that are really important to you that you really want to honor. And that without it, it really affects you. So first write out 1 to 3 of those non-negotiables. And after writing that out, for each one, I want you to write out a boundary, so a limit or a rule that you want to put in place to support or protect that. So what could you put in place to kind of support you in honoring that? And then the third step is to reread both of these and make sure it's clear and realistic. So if you're new to setting boundaries or you struggle with them, I highly encourage you to start small and work on really honoring that and building from there. Because with boundaries, it's so important that we honor them because we dictate how others will respect them. So make sure this is something realistic for you to first honor, and you can grow and build with this. But because we set the tone, it's so important that we make sure it's clear and realistic when we're getting started. So kind of check in with yourself on making sure that's clear and realistic. So now I would love to open it up. If anyone is open to sharing kind of their non-negotiable and boundary they've set, feel free to unmute yourself or to share it in the chat. I'd love to hear some boundaries we have, and you may, who knows, you may inspire others by what you've come up with. So feel free to share if you feel open to it. Anyone have one they're very excited about? They're ready already to start acting on it? Anyone want to share in the chat if not feeling like speaking up? Oh, I love this one. Not going on social media over the weekend. Really staying present. Ooh, the struggle between self-discipline and self-compassion. We'll talk a bit about that as well. Any other boundaries? Oh, better workout schedule during the week and through the holidays. And Katie, what is that boundary you're putting in place to have that better workout schedule? Jenny sharing, not leave the office past 7 p.m. So prioritizing really making the gym and working out. Oh, I love this. Not talking to negative energy people, keeping that Energy high and positive. Ooh, trusting my own instinct. Yes, logging off to make it to the gym, prioritizing that workout time for yourself. Loving all of these. Thank you all for sharing. So now that we've written out some boundaries, and thank you all for sharing, these are great examples. So we've written out a few boundaries, and I just recently read a book that I really loved that spoke about writing these out is like creating a written contract with yourself. So this is creating a commitment to yourself by writing this down that I will honor this. So if you're open to it, I highly suggest continuing this activity after this presentation and taking some time on your weekend or evening to write out the rest of your boundaries. You can even go by categories like relationships, career, general social life, and just writing out what these boundaries are. Going back to doing that, okay, what's important to me? What are my non-negotiables in terms of this? And what rule or limit do I need to put in place to really protect that non-negotiable? So writing this all out and creating this written contract with yourself, because so important that we are clear on our boundaries since we dictate how others honor this. So it all starts with us. I know I've repeated this multiple times, but it's so important. So writing that written contract out and getting crystal clear on what these boundaries are really communicates that with yourself in order for you to really uphold this and honor it, for others to respect that. And not just, the first step is communicating with yourself and being clear on it, but it's also very important to communicate this with others. And I see a question in the chat right now asking about, is there also ways to communicate with different people to create a collective dialogue? And yes, there definitely is. That's also so important. So communicating boundaries can be nonverbal and it can be verbal. So going back to my example of Mary, who decided she's going to log off at 7 p.m. and no longer respond to work emails or Slacks unless they're urgent after 7 p.m. to spend time with her family and have her workout time. Thinking about that example of Mary, when she puts that boundary in place, she can go about it two ways. She could literally just stop responding to all Slacks and emails after 7 p.m. Her work hours are 9 to 6. That was never an expectation. She was just continuing to work into her evenings. And by not responding and always responding when she logs on the next morning at 9 a.m., her colleagues will start to realize, wow, I can no longer get a hold of her at 10 p.m. or 9 p.m. And just they'll realize that she's not working those later hours and start respecting and reaching out to her at 9 a.m. or within those work hours. So that's one way Mary can go about it. But for some of us, especially with work, it can get challenging. So don't hesitate. Like in Mary's situation, she could communicate with her colleagues. Like, I really need to make this time for myself in the evenings and my family. I've been working later nights, but I'm going to start logging off at 7 p.m. to really have this time for my family and myself, and that's so important. So creating that open dialogue can definitely allow others to understand that this is something that's important to you and why they might see this shift or how you're prioritizing this. So highly encourage, depending on your comfort level, whether that's communicating, just putting this into action and that nonverbal communication, or communicating with others, but your loved ones, family, whether it be family members, friends, or colleagues. Once you communicate this need and how important this is to you and how you're, and knowing that you're honoring yourself with this, I don't doubt that they will be supportive. And that communication is empowering because you're prioritizing yourself and you are respecting your own needs. And the more you do that, the more others will see that and respect that. The stronger you are with your boundaries, the better others will respect it. If you look at some others you know that have strong boundaries, I'm sure you likely see the positive of that and how they're very firm and know that strong identity and knowing what they want and knowing when to say no and when to say yes, and what's important to them. So again, starting small and building, but each time you put a boundary in place, you'll feel that feeling of empowerment because this overall is helping your overall well-being because you're honoring something that's important to you. So just again to highlight how important it is to be crystal clear on what they are for yourself first, and then communicate with those involved, either by putting those into action or putting them into action and also allowing others to understand why you're putting this boundary into place. But just to talk about some potential challenges, there is no need to always explain your boundaries, right? One challenge you could face is over explaining when you're first putting boundaries into place. The need to always say why. Why is it a no? So you have the power to decide what you do and do not want to do. So there's no need to over explain. This is easier said than done, especially when we're first getting started. But just know that you have the power to decide what you do and do not want to do. If a friend is trying to kind of drag you out an extra night of the week and you really need that time for rest, no need to say why. Just say, no, I'm going to stay in tonight. Just practice saying no and saying it firmly without having to give a reason. It's actually a super empowering feeling when, and especially for all my fellow previous people pleasers out there, always saying yes, to say no and just be like, no, I need to honor myself tonight. I'm going to stay in and rest, and saying it firmly. So as you're putting these into place, practice that. Practice saying no, saying firmly, not over explaining. And again, this takes practice and it's a process. So be kind to yourself, but feel how empowering it feels to know when you're really honoring yourself and saying no. And of course, you can say yes when you feel that it's something you want to do and you feel that you have that capacity. But when you know this is impeding on one of your boundaries, say no and say it firmly. So another thing is to focus on you. Boundaries are about you. They're protecting your needs and you are prioritizing you. So often when you're new to boundaries, been there with this, many might get surprised when you're putting these in place because they're used to you saying yes to everything. So remind yourself that you're doing this to honor yourself. And others might say, going back to that example of a friend trying to pull you out another night of the week when you really need this time for rest, they might say, oh, you never want to hang out with me anymore. You never want to spend time with me. And they might start to internalize that. But the key is to recognize that it's about you. And in these cases, it might support you if you're feeling that guilt or that weight coming from another, just to say, hey, I love you. I'd love to spend time with you, but I really need this night to myself. Or just explaining to them that it's not about them, that this is something that you need to honor your own needs, because boundaries are really also an act of self-care. Yet also practicing not over-explaining. There's a balance there, but it doesn't hurt to tell someone why you're putting this in place, especially if it's a close friend kind of feeling that in that case where someone's making it about them, just reminding them that this is really for you. So lastly, make sure you have a response plan. So at times when putting boundaries in place, there may be people that continue to disrespect those boundaries and continue to not honor these needs that you are really being firm on. So if that's happening to you and you feel someone is continuously disrespecting a boundary you put in place, that may be a relationship that it's time to distance from or to the extreme eliminate. But have a plan on how you want to handle if someone is kind of breaking your boundary. And by you being crystal clear on what these are, you'll know when that's happening. And the key is just to know how you want to handle that, whether it's distancing, whether it's kind of maybe eliminating that relationship. That's kind of the extreme there, but just know how you want to respond to that, because again, these are limits you're putting in place to honor your needs and your wants. So the people that love and respect you should, we hope, honor these. So kind of have that response plan in place and be firm on it, because again, how we dictate how others respond. It all starts with us in setting these boundaries. So I just wanted to share some general tips on setting boundaries. I've shared a bit about this as we've gone, but starting small and being realistic, especially for those of us new to setting these or who are struggling with this, is really starting small and then building from there. Because it's similar to habit building. The more we honor it, the better, the easier it becomes. So Really start small and notice that empowering feeling when you're really starting to honor these boundaries, and notice the positive effects and shifts that come from really just prioritizing yourself. And also be realistic. Make sure that you can really honor these, since it all starts with us. Also, acknowledge yourself. When you set a boundary and you say no to something and prioritize yourself, acknowledge that. That's an act of self-care right there. But however you celebrate your wins, celebrate yourself for that, because you are putting yourself first, and that is so important in allowing us to show up for others by honoring our own needs. But also, as I've mentioned, boundaries can be challenging and there can be slip ups. So don't be hard on yourself. This is where that comes in. I think it was mentioned earlier about that self compassion. You want to be disciplined, but give yourself compassion. Things happen. Know that maybe, oh, that was a boundary, and I let that person violate that, but I'm learning, and next time I know I want to handle that differently. It's all a process. So really be kind to yourself and be gentle as you are growing with this. And these are not set in stone. Yes, but no means no, and be firm on that. I see that in the chat. Yes. Allow them to shift and be redefined. So say you write out all of these boundaries as that activity I was sharing. Don't feel that this is your life list of boundaries. Our lives change, our careers change, what our beliefs, our values. So our boundaries can change as we change and evolve. So maybe this is something you want to revisit, whether it be every couple weeks, every couple months, but revisit these boundaries and reassess them. The most important part, though, is that you're clear on them. So as you make these changes, make sure you're clear on them, because that sets you up to honor them, which sets up others to honor them. And finally, maybe you want to create a mantra. So create a mantra to support your boundary setting. So here's an example. So I set boundaries as an act of self-love and protection, to remind yourself why you're doing this and how you're prioritizing yourself. And you could put this mantra on, say, a Post-it note, maybe next, like on your computer. You could put it on a mirror where you see it every day, or on a vision board. But just having this reminder. So maybe if someone's starting to violate it, you can look at that and remind yourself why you have that in place. So does anyone have any mantras that have come to mind or a mantra they'd like to put into action surrounding their boundaries? If you do, feel free to share it in the chat or unmute yourself. Love to hear. Looks like Naomi is loving this one, and y'all are free to use this one. I matter. Oh, I love that. Yes, that's a great one. Another example could be, I set boundaries because I honor my relationships with others. So if you have a mantra to share, feel free to share in the chat or unmute yourself and share, related to kind of upholding and honoring these boundaries. Anyone else? You are important, you are beautiful, you are strong. Love that. Yeah, so whatever resonates with you, you can create this mantra. Something that really is going to remind you of why you're putting this in place and why it's important to you, so that you can see these. Okay, I'm going to write it in here real quick. Someone. So yes, so whatever resonates with you as this mantra, having that somewhere that's clearly visible, so it can be a reminder every time that maybe someone's violating that, or to prevent someone from violating that, and to make sure you're upholding that and to keep them top of mind. So given the times, boundaries have always been important, but with many of us living at home with significant others, with our families, boundaries are so important right now in order to protect our overall health and well-being. So here are just some examples that could be COVID specific boundary, kind of to protect your time, whether it be that closing the computer at 7 p.m. to spend time with family and friends, or not checking phone or emails or calls until completing a morning routine. I'd love to hear if any of you have put into place specific boundaries during COVID, or if this has inspired you to add any new boundaries, and what you share may inspire others, because I know we all are navigating these times and different shelters in place. So it would be great to hear if anyone has any specific boundaries they've put into place or would like to put into place in relation to the times. Again, feel free to share in the chat or unmute yourself if you want to share. Not working on weekends. Yes, having that time for yourself. That's a great one. Oh, I love this. Reaching out to nourishing relationships to help pull me out. So important connection right now, especially with many of us not being stuck at home and finding that connection. And that, I know we're all in this virtual world right now, like we're connecting now, but really finding that connection and reaching out to others. In those nourishing relationships. I love that. Any other COVID specific boundaries? Meditation and exercise. Yes, that has been, I'm just going to say, a savior for me in COVID. Just, I was sharing earlier that morning meditation. So it sounds like that you're feeling inspired to implement some boundaries around meditation and exercise, and definitely has made a huge difference for me having that morning meditation. So yes, that designated workplace and only doing it in that place. Such a great COVID boundary there, especially when we're blending so much right now with our home and work. Having that designated space can really support separating work from our outside time with family and other activities. Awesome. Any others? These are all great, and I hope that by all of us sharing these, maybe it's inspired some of us to put some in place, because I know many of us can relate in just this whole blend of home and work, given the times and everything being going virtual. So COVID specific boundaries, are having these boundaries in place are so important to protect our overall health and well-being and honor kind of our needs, given that many things have been shifting and all of this is taking place in the home right now. Oh, here's one other. Going outside and sitting with all of my senses, being grateful for having space. So getting into nature however you can. Yes, nature is everything right now in those outdoors, and just getting fresh air and really getting to unwind. I love that one. These are all great. So just to wrap up with some final words of wisdom before we go to questions, I love this quote by Brené Brown, that daring to set boundaries is about having the courage to love ourselves even when we risk disappointing others. So again, it's kind of what we talked about earlier, about how when we first put boundaries in place, others might make it about them or they might seem disappointed, but reminding yourself that this is an act of self-care, an act of self-love, and it takes courage to put these into place, but ultimately you're honoring yourself and prioritizing yourself. Yes, Brené Brown is the queen. Yes. So ultimately we're honoring ourselves and prioritizing our needs by putting boundaries into place. So reminding again that this is about you and honoring you, and that showing up for yourself actually allows us to best show up for others. So while others might be surprised by this at first, they might take it personally a bit or make it about them. In the end, by showing up for ourselves, we're allowing ourselves to better show up for others by honoring our own needs. So remembering that this all comes full circle. And I think someone had mentioned this earlier, but this quote here, no is a complete sentence, and really saying that no firmly, and that no one will listen to us until we listen to ourselves. So again, that we set the tone with our boundaries. It takes us honoring them for and upholding them for others to respect it. So we really dictate that. So again, making sure that we're setting realistic boundaries to start and building to make sure we're really honoring these and really creating this space for ourselves. So I want to open it up now to if anyone has any questions, or if anyone wanted to share anything, any of their learnings or any of their personal experience, feel free to unmute yourself and share, or share in the chat. Yes, it is a process, and it takes time, but it is so empowering and creates so many positive shifts when we put these in place. So this is why it's so important to be compassionate with yourself and gentle as you go through the process of putting these into place. But just notice what, as you start small and build, the shifts that come about. Any other learnings or experiences to share? Here we have preventing it with boundary, then fixing problems later. Yes, exactly. It's because you're honoring yourself, you're preventing a conflict from happening because you're protecting yourself with this boundary. So someone is mentioning, what if a supervisor is violating boundaries? So tell me more if you're willing to kind of unmute yourself and share.
Oh, hi.
Hi.
Yeah. So, I mean, I guess, I mean, quite, let's say, I mean, quite frankly, what's happening is illegal. But I mean, what if a supervisor, for example, if I've requested to reduce email traffic and the supervisor is unwilling to respect that? I mean, or, or, yeah, I mean, it's basically a supervisor who seeks to command, control, and suppress than to empower and support. But I guess, how do you maintain boundaries when it's your supervisor?
So that is definitely a challenging area, especially when it's given work and this is your supervisor. But knowing your general job responsibilities and knowing when they're really violating a boundary that's outside of course, your general job responsibilities, I would suggest if it's really affecting you negatively and you're really feeling depleted by it, is talking to HR, since that's a supervisor, or having a conversation with them first and just being open about kind of what's happening. But of course, always keeping it very professional and sharing with them how it's affecting you and that you're wanting to do your best work, and kind of how them violating this boundary is preventing you from doing that. But that can be very challenging. So I hear you, and especially considering that is your supervisor and you're trying to put these into place. But really just having that open dialogue, comes back to communicating and having that open dialogue with them. Anyone else? Just checking back at some questions that may have been mentioned earlier. I love this, Tanya. It is hard and it can be challenging, but there is a big payoff once these are put in place. And I love this: starting small, committing, and communicating. Oh, those are 3 great words: small, commit, and communicate. It's really taking that action and being committed to it, because again, it comes back to us honoring them first so that others can respect them, and us being clear on what they are. This is a great question on how to kind of balance that self-discipline and that self-compassion. So I think it's recognizing when this is a slip up and when this is a pattern. So being disciplined with yourself is important when setting boundaries, because it takes you honoring them first, just like habit building. It takes doing this repeatedly. But there can be slip ups. It can happen, and just being compassionate with ourselves. But if we're finding ourselves slipping up multiple times in a row, then kind of reevaluating what's getting in the way of me upholding this boundary. Or is this a realistic boundary I'm setting? Do I need to break this down a bit and start there? So kind of looking at how this is going, if this is a repeated pattern or if this is kind of a slip up, but just really being compassionate with ourselves in the process and reflecting on kind of what's getting in the way here. Why am I struggling with this? And really working through that. Does anyone else have anything to share about this balance between self-discipline and self-compassion? I think this can be definitely something that's challenging for us all as we put boundaries in place. I think someone earlier was asking about books, video, podcasts, and or resources that one would recommend. I listened to a great podcast actually this week. It's called the Expanded Podcast. I'm going to actually just double check with Lacey Phillips, and she did a whole podcast on boundaries. That was, I will get the name. Yes, it's Expanded with Lacey Phillips. I'll write it in the chat. And the topic was just boundaries itself. And I love the episode, and I highly recommend checking it out if you want to dive deeper into this. I'm going to share it in the chat here. Anyone else want to share anyone else want to just share about kind of their experience with so far with setting boundaries?
We do have questions. If we want to kind of loop some of those in to this as well, just giving you just letting you know.
Yeah, no, definitely. You can start with those.
All right, cool. All right, so we touched on the supervisor is violating boundaries. So question, how do people keep boundaries with families where there's a lot of conflicts and get emotionally attached? How does one detach from these?
So boundaries with family can be very challenging, but I think that what's important there, and I'm open this up to any others who'd like to share, but what's important there is, again, that open dialogue, communicating why this boundary is important to you and why you're putting that into place, and making sure there's a general understanding there. And that, especially when you're starting to set new boundaries with family members, it's very important to be firm on it, but it may require more of an open dialogue for them to understand why you're putting this into place. Jill, do you have any other thoughts on?
Yeah. and I'm sharing this with Michelle. It was her question. Yeah, I think, oh gosh, families are so difficult. And I feel that, I mean, my partner and I had to go through some challenging conversations with COVID, and families not understanding or not being in our position. And, and so something that helped me kind of work through that was sharing exactly that, like telling our families and just being like, listen, this has nothing to do with you. Even if it might, they don't need to know that per se. And just focusing it on yourself. Because all we were just saying was, this has nothing to do with you. These are our choices. These are our decisions. These are protecting us. I think just exactly what you said, just that open dialogue is so important, and inviting in that conversation to keep it more of like an open conversation. But of course, standing firm to your boundaries is so important too. But yeah, I think just that open dialogue is really important, and just circling it all back to yourself. This is for me. This is to give me space. This is for me. This is for me. This is for me. Because of course, we all know family, they're going to take things personally. They're going to assume it's about them. They're going to freak out. They're going to do all that stuff. But if you just continue to focus that this is for me, this is for us, then that tends to help keep the focus on yourself.
Yes, definitely. So agree with that. Any other questions? I think you're muted.
Yep,
sorry.
I'm muted. All right, another question. Is there a way to communicate with different people to create collective dialogue? I'm not sure about that one.
I'm trying to understand that.
Let me see. I'm going to connect with the person who asked that, and just to clarify. But so hang tight on that. Let's see if I missed any other questions, just to make sure. So those are the only two that I had so far. But does anyone else have any other questions right now, since we're already in here? Feel free to unmute yourself as well. Another question, I'm not sure if you saw this. Did you answer how to balance self-discipline and self-compassion? When to push and self-love? Okay, awesome. All right, yeah, I think that was a bit. All right, those are the two that I had.
Okay, awesome. Well, just as we finish up, just want to check in on if anyone has any last things they want to share with the group, any last learnings. Feel free to share it in the chat or unmute yourself as we're finishing up. Okay, well, don't hesitate to speak up if you'd like before we finish up. But so here's my information. I'm, as I said, Kristin Vierra. Here's my email and Instagram. Please don't hesitate to reach out if you have any questions or you want to talk more about this topic. I love talking about boundaries, so you feel free to reach out to me, or if you want some other resources, I'm happy to share. And also, Jill's going to share a link in the chat, so feel free to click through that link, and this way you can get in touch with a relationship specialist on our team to chat and hear more kind of about how we can support you at ALV with our excellent team of coaches, where if you're interested in learning more just about how we can support you, whether it be with boundary setting, with just building those healthy habits, or just overall, what we're passionate about is really helping you to build a lifestyle and career that you love. We're here to support you, so feel free to use that link to kind of reach out and speak with one of our specialists on our team. And if anyone has any last things they want to share, or maybe any last mantras you want to share about boundary setting that's come up, to share in the chat. But I hope all of you took away some helpful tools today to really help you honor yourself and put those boundaries in place, because it's so important that we really prioritize our needs and respect ourselves and really honor our needs so that we can best show up for those around us. And really getting these firm boundaries in place and really sticking to them can really create a lot of positive impacts in our lives. And especially in these times in our homes when we're all kind of spending a lot of quality time together, which is great, but also needing our own personal space. So I hope you all have a great, happy holidays to all of you, to having some great boundaries at that holiday dinner table too. I know there can be some interesting conversations in our families. But yeah, boundaries really just reflect in all areas of our life. So I hope you can take this away and kind of use that to support your overall lifestyle and well-being. So thank you all for joining.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kristin. This was wonderful. And by the comments, this was much needed. I think we need to keep this as a quarterly reminder for boundaries. All right, everyone. Well, thank you all so much for joining. And again, thank you, Kristin, for your expertise in this. I know we all need these friendly reminders. I will be sending a recording out after, so keep an eye out for that. And if you, I'll also include other ways to stay connected with Kristin and Vida, and all those fun ways to stay in touch with all of our events. And thank you guys. All right, yes, enough rambling. I'll provide all of that information in the follow-up email. So please let us know if you have any other questions. I know sometimes with some of these webinars that there's a lot of really great information shared. And it takes us some time to process and think of questions to ask as opposed to right on the spot. So if you do have any questions that come up, please reply to that email that I'll be sending probably tomorrow as a recap. So you can ask Kristin any direct questions there. We're humans behind those emails. So definitely let us know. Wonderful.
Thank you all for participating too.
All right. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you soon.
Bye.
Bye.